All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this session on the key verbal strategies that you need to master to score 750. I see that many of you are here. I can see about 36 of you over here. So first things first, can you guys hear me clearly? Let's, if you can put your answers in the chat pod, that'd be great. So. Hey Harshvardhan, good to see. I know you've been here you've attended a few of our webinars. So yeah, perfect. That sounds wonderful. Um, it's good to see a few familiar faces. It's also really good to see quite a few new faces over here. So I want to welcome everyone to the session over here. And Nava, if you can also share actually I can share my screen. We're doing this the first time where I am not the host over here. Let's go to screen 1 and let's go in the share screen mode. I'm going to hide this. You guys should be seeing the screen which says GMAT 750 key verbal strategies to score 750 plus over here. So that's something which is there. So just let's talk about that 750 score. It's really important when it comes to thinking about the 750 score to have that 750 mindset. And this graphic over here actually talks about that 750 mindset in this case. So about 200,000 people take the GMAT every year. And when you think about, that 750 score is a top 2 percentile, so which means that about 4,000 people out of those get to that score. So when you're thinking of that 750 score, and you're thinking about the verbal aspect of it, your goal is to be among the best of the best. And which means that when you're studying, you need to keep that goal in mind. Why? Because every day, every hour that you put in, you make decisions to really go in depth or to let go of certain things. And knowing that this is what you're aiming for is something that helps you make the right decision when you are in that moment. And it's those little decisions that lead to that 750 score in an efficient manner. Otherwise, you end up spending a lot of time getting to that score. So quick poll question here, and most of the polls that we'll do will be on actually a form, but just poll questions over here with regards to what's the lowest you think you need to score on the verbal side of things to get to that 750 score. So let's get a few responses. What's the lowest verbal score? And this is a score in percentile, not the score out of 60, but in percentile that you think you need to get to that 750 score or higher. Let's get some data points over here. Okay, 39, 40, 41, 42. It's good. So good responses. So the lowest, which is out of 60 is 40, but in terms of percentile, it's around that 91st to 94th percentile over here. And again, this is setting that context. So the way to get to the lowest is to get to maximize your quant, which means you get a Q51. If you get a Q51, then a safe score is a V40, and V40 is your 91st percentile. Most people actually get to that V41 is because Q51 is very unpredictable. Q50 a lot more predictable. So they want to get to a V41, which is 94th percentile. So again, give or take, 91 versus 94 doesn't matter a whole lot. What matters is you are aiming to be among the top 10 percentile of verbal, in the top 10 percentile on GMAT verbal among all the test takers over there. So there are 2 ways to get there. And this is something that we talked about in a session that Dhananjay hosted about 4 or 5 weeks back. One is to, you kind of spend 500 hours doing this, and which means that you actually solve a ton of questions. And then even when you do this, your likelihood of getting there is about 10%. And that's something which, we as a company, we collect a lot of data. GMAT Club also collects a lot of data. And based on the data that we have seen, people who actually spend a ton more of time focus on just solving questions. They succeed, but it takes them multiple attempts to get there. They end up spending a lot more time, a lot more money. On the other hand, people who prepare more strategically, they spend fewer hours, they solve fewer questions, their likelihood can be as high as this 80%. And in the prior session, we talked about how do you plan for it so that you get to that, you increase that likelihood to 80%. In this particular session, what we want to really do is we want to really talk about how should you study, just the very fundamentals of how should you study so that you increase that likelihood to 80%. Now, with regards to how do you increase that likelihood at a very, very high level? So, when you think about that entire aspirant pool, the kind of two kinds of people who go there. One is people who kind of work with data, which means they prepare, they evaluate themselves as to how they're preparing, and they take that feedback and adjust their preparation. And that's about half of the test takers over there. And the other half are just people who blindly prepare. They take towards the end of, they take a GMAT test there, towards the end, last 20 days, they take mocks, and then they kind of really say, hey, I'm going to go see what happens. And I'm sure there are a few people who are like that. Now, people who, hold on, something weird is happening over here. So people who work with data-driven feedback, about 10% of them get to that 720 score. But then you can increase that likelihood to get to that 720 or higher, or get to that 750 score if you do two things. One is you have a study plan that's personalized to you, which means that you know where you spend time and where you don't spend time, which forces or focuses your energy on the areas that help you improve. The other is if you don't have a study plan. Now, if just by merely creating that study plan, channelizing your energy on the right things, you actually increase that chance of success by 2.5 times. Now, you also have to focus on using the right methods to get there. If you're studying, you increase the number of feedback points, which means you iterate a lot faster. That's when you get to increase that chance from that 25% to 80%. And again, when you do that feedback, when you get that 250 odd feedback points, you also do that strategic review. That's when you increase that probability of getting there. Why? Because you know when you're getting there, and you know when you're not getting there, and you do course correction in prep every 2 days rather than waiting for it towards the end of the month. So our focus in this particular session is going to be on this proper method, on a few questions, and then the right kind of feedback based on whether you get it right or whether you get it wrong. So this is one, this is where we're going to focus on, and two, this is where we're going to focus on. We're not going to focus on how do you build a study plan or a few other things over here. Okay. So and why do we say that we can do this? Because if you look at this kind of success that we've delivered reasonable amount of success. If you focus on just the verbal part, and if you look at the verbal reviews over here, what you're going to find is we probably delivered twice as much success as every other prep company on the world in GMAT Club combined when it comes to just verbal. And here are some examples. But with that, let's kind of talk about what we're going to do over here. We're going to focus on some key skills that you need to excel on GMAT Verbal. And again, when you think about GMAT Verbal, you're talking about sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. It's a lot of space, or it's a lot of ground to cover. So what I decided was to focus a bit more and to go in depth. So for sentence correction, we're not going to focus on sentence correction here today, but we have a free webinar on Saturday. I'm going to share the link in the chat pod over here, and you can register for it. And so we'd go in depth over there. We'll focus on critical reasoning over here, and we'll focus on solving some reasonably difficult questions in boldface over here. And then we'll focus on reading comprehension. And then on reading comprehension, we're going to focus on building that right foundation. And then we have two webinars, one next Thursday that we are hosting on GMAT Club, and one next Saturday that we are hosting on our platform. These are going to be two distinct webinars, and we're going to give you the links to register for these as well. Okay. So with that, first things first, if you want to register for that SC webinar, Nava, who's my colleague who's supporting me today, he can give you the link to register for the SC webinar. And again, this is what we're going to really focus on. We're going to focus on that meaning-based approach. We're going to focus on how do you understand what the author intends to communicate through a particular sentence by using sentence structure. How do you leverage that sentence structure then to identify the errors that are there in the original sentence? And then we're going to move towards the process of elimination. With that, let's go right into the critical reasoning part of this webinar. Again, the first section, we're going to solve 2 critical reasoning questions. And again, at this point in time, we're going to solve. I'm going to give you 2 questions. We're going to do it as a quiz. I want everyone to put your answers in the polls that we provide. Okay, and I want some volunteers who actually help me do this. We want each one of you to get feedback that's personalized to you. So please refrain from posting which answer choice is correct in the chat pod. Why? Because it biases others' thinking. When that happens, you as an individual, you don't get that feedback that's personalized to you. So are we clear? Can we get an opt-in from everyone? Say yes, we will post it on the poll before I show the questions. Can we get an opt-in, please? Just a yes or an acknowledgement would be great. And as soon as we get that, we're going to post the questions over here. And again, all right, perfect. Thank you. So we have 2 questions. The poll that you get will have both these questions. You don't need to refer to the screen. The poll will have the question stem. It'll have the stimulus as well as the answer choices. With regards to what we want to do, we want to talk about these 3 things, which is, hey, how do you identify and understand the conclusion? How do you pre-think the answer? And how do you simplify answer choices before we choose? But while doing each of these steps, I want to focus on this one more overarching skill, which is visualize. Okay, we want to focus on the skill of visualize as we look at the conclusion over there, and as we want to visualize as we look at the argument structure or the logic that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion. Now, this is boldface, so we're not thinking outside the argument, but just to really understand the nuts and bolts of the argument, you need to do that visualization. And as we simplify the answer choices, we need to visualize what that answer choice is saying. So we need to do that. With that, let's look at the first question. It's a 650 level question. You're going to get the poll, which has both the questions. So feel free to essentially solve both questions over here. And then at my end, I'm going to start a timer so that I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. So don't rush through them. Spend all the time that you need to solve these questions, or not all the time, but a reasonable amount of time is what I would say. And I have my timer turned on. And Nava, if you can change the view so that the slide covers the entire screen rather than my webcam, that'd be great. All right, guys, as I mentioned, please do not post the answers over here. Okay. Uh, uh, the answers are to be posted in the poll. We had a promise. We had people opt in. So do not post the answers here. As you post the answers in the poll, I'd get them. Okay, you can now see the second question on the screen. So yeah, let's get the answers to that one as well. Nava, if you can post the poll link again for people who've just joined, that's where you need to post your answers. If you don't have the poll link, please use that. All right. 5, 4, 3. Now you can bring my video back in. 2 and 1. Let's get those responses in before we close the poll. All right, we have about 15 responses over here. Let's see if we can get to about 20 responses on the poll. All right, let's move forward. And again, guys, one thing, if we want to get useful, I mean, if you just want to solve questions, GMAT Club has many questions to solve. If you truly want to learn, if you truly want to get feedback that's personalized to you, then please refrain from posting the responses over here. That way, everyone over here gets to learn. All right, so let's look at this one over here and let me share the responses. The accuracy over here was about 57%. And again, there's a bias towards the accuracy because essentially some people posted the answers, and that does have an impact over here. So let me just see how you guys polled. Over here, we got 16 responses, 50. So about 9 out of those 16 chose choice C. That's 9. Choice D was 5. So and then 1 was choice A, and 1 was choice E over here. So that was the overall accuracy in this one. So let's kind of look at how we approach this question. All right. So when it comes to answering bold-faced questions, you've got to follow a process. If you follow this process, you'd get to the correct answer every time. Why? Because in bold-faced questions, you don't have to look outside the argument. You even though it's an argument, you're still looking inwards. It's about structure of argument question over here. So the first thing you do is you read the passage statement by statement, or by combining a couple of statements, and then classify what each of these statements is. The second thing that you do then is you look at you identify what's the main conclusion and understand the role of each statement with regards to the main conclusion. And what does each statement do with regards to helping the author arrive at the main conclusion? Does it support the author? Does it go against what the author is saying? Is it an intermediate conclusion? Then you really focus on, once you have the structure of the argument clear in your mind, which is where the visualization happens, you then pre-think what's the role played by each bold-faced statement, or each bolded statement. And this pre-thinking is a very, very, I would say, if you have 2 done over here, this is 1. If you have 2 done, then this 3 is a very mechanical process. All you're really saying is bold-faced 1 is X, and it supports or refutes the main conclusion. That's kind of what you're doing in your pre-thinking. Okay, and then post that, you go and do that option statement analysis, where you again look at each option independently and reject or select the correct one. Okay, so with that, let's kind of do passage analysis over here. The first statement says stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue, also called extremely large cap, so rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So what is this? The author is giving you a data point. He's giving you statistic. It's an observation that the author is really saying. So this is a factual piece. We don't doubt information provided by the author if it's an observation or a fact in GMAT-CR. Then the author says, it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. So what the author then really presents is a general opinion over here. So this overall statement, a lot of people, when they look at this statement, they say it's an opinion. If you look at this entire statement in the overall context, it is a fact. But when you look at the underlying part over here, that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market, that's a belief or an opinion, and it's not the author's belief. It's a general belief. Why? Because look at the structure of this part. It is commonly thought. The author is not saying that I believe that this happens because of this. The author is saying, in general, people think. Maybe the author doesn't think that way whenever you see that structure. And again, this distinction of fact versus claim, how is it that this entire statement is a fact, whereas it houses a claim in it, is really important, because when questions get more challenging, in this question we're not testing this, but when questions get more challenging, this is tested over here. So if the author, and I'm giving you a parallel sentence over here, if the author gave you a statement such as this, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard, and you were to really say, is this a fact or a claim? What you would call it is a fact. Why? Because you're not going to dispute whether Business Week said something. What you might dispute is whether Wharton is indeed better than Harvard. So you might dispute this aspect of it. This is an opinion. This is disputable. But this entire statement starting from according to Business Week is not disputable. You're not going to dispute whether Business Week said Wharton is better than Harvard or not. So in the same way, when we look at this, we might dispute whether this part is true. So this is a claim, and hence it's disputable. But when you look at this in its entirety, you're not going to dispute this part over here, that whether it's commonly thought or not. This part makes this entire statement a fact. A really important distinction between fact and claim. So let's go over here. We've done this. Overall is a fact. The underlying part is a claim or a general belief, and it's there because it's trying to explain that observation. It says, hey, the reason why they don't beat the market over a 5-year period is because it's just too big to grow faster than the overall market. Then the author uses a contrast. You have a contrast keyword. It's something that we're going to see in RC as well. It says, however, studies show that ELCs that provide higher return than the market over a 5-year period, a majority of them are run by their founders. Now, this is where you read and contextualize information. Start with however. There's a contrast being presented here. The second thing is studies show that ELCs that provide higher return than the market, this relative pronoun over here, or this relative pronoun over here, has a segmentation impact. It's not talking about all the ELCs over here. It's talking about, if this is the group of all the ELCs, it's talking about the select segment of ELCs that may provide higher return than the market. Maybe that's 10% of all ELCs, but it's saying that there is that 10%, or there is that group of ELCs that provide higher return than the market. And then there's a fact about these, a commonality to these, that a majority of them are run by their founders. Okay. So when you look at this, you really say, hey, there are exceptions to statement one that exists. Not every ELC is such that they can't beat the market. And then to that group, there's a characteristic that's common to most of those exceptions, and both of these are facts. We're not to dispute them. Then the author gives you another fact. It's starting with since. If you're an EG math student, you know since is a premise indicator. Since is a reason indicator. Since most ELCs are run by professional management, that is inherently risk averse. So there's another fact that you did not know prior to reading the statement that you now know about ELCs in general. The study's finding strongly suggests that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not that they're too big to grow, but rather blah, 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 blah. So this is what the author believes, and this is the author's conclusion. This is also the main conclusion of the argument. It's the author reasons why most ELCs don't grow. It's not, and he's saying it's not that they can't grow, it's just that the professional management that is running is very risk averse. And when you think about this, this thing refutes, this conclusion goes against the accepted belief. Now, what is the accepted belief over here? What is the accepted belief? Can anyone tell me? What's the accepted belief that this is going against? The accepted belief is that this is too big to grow. All right, so with that, let's kind of build that argument structure around this over here, okay? This is your main conclusion. That's something which is there. This is a fact that supports that main conclusion. It makes the main conclusion more believable. This statement, however, also supports the main conclusion. Why? Because when you think about this, this introduces a group of ELCs that provide higher returns than the market over a 5-year period. And what this is saying is, so prior to this, we didn't know that this group existed. Okay. So let's go over here. The first statement is a context or a fact, and based on which the general belief is constructed. The third statement, again, we saw it's a fact that supports the main conclusion. Fourth statement, again, another fact that supports the main conclusion. And statement 5 is the author's conclusion over here. Okay. So when you think about the pre-thinking, what is this pre-thinking? Boldface 1 is a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend. What is boldface 1? A majority of them are run by their founders. That's boldface 1. What is it? It's a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend. It is a data point or a fact which is provided to make the author's conclusion more believable. Without this data point, the author's conclusion is not going to be as believable, but with this data point, this author's conclusion is going to be more believable. The second piece is really your main conclusion. That's the reason what the author believes in. It's the reason for the observed trend. What is the trend? That ELCs rarely beat the market. Okay, it's the alternate explanation, or it's also the alternate reason why ELCs rarely beat the market, which is what the author favors. It's also the main conclusion of the argument. All right. With this pre-thinking, so this is when we do this over here, this is what we call as pre-thinking. With this pre-thinking in place, let's now look at the answer choices over here. Okay. And again, let me actually look at and see how you guys polled, because we have a few more responses that we have over here. Okay, yes. So we have 15 of you who've chosen, 15 of you who've chosen this over here. And then again, choice D is the most popular and correct choice as well. So with that, let's just move forward in this. So we'll start very briefly with choice A. Choice A says the first is a claim. The moment you see this, you say, hey, this can't be true. We know the first is a fact, so I'm going to just reject choice A and over there. Let's go to choice B. The accuracy of which is at issue, we don't know. The accuracy of this is not at issue in the argument. That's wrong for that as well, but I just go off from there itself and do this. The second part is correct. So for those of you who need that comprehensive response, the second part is correct, which is the second is the conclusion drawn on the basis of that. And the second is the conclusion, but it's not on the basis of that claim over here. Okay, it's that fact. Choice B says the first is an objection that has been raised against a position defended in the argument. When you look at this and it'll say, does the argument defend a position? And you say, no, that's not correct. Is the first an objection against something? No, that's not correct as well. And because of which, I'm going to go reject choice B over there. Okay. Choice C says, which is our correct answer, the first is evidence, that is true, fact can be evidence, that has been used to support something. What? An explanation that the argument favors. Okay, so an explanation that the argument favors means that a conclusion that the argument favors. So in the first definitely supports that. So this part is correct. This part is correct as well. And the second is that explanation. The second is definitely that conclusion. So this part is, let me just make my text better. So this part is correct as well, which makes choice C my correct answer. Choice D says, is very popular choice. Let's look at this. And we're going to focus our time on this. The first is evidence. That is okay. That has been used to support something. What? An explanation that the argument challenges. Which explanation does the argument challenge, guys? Which explanation does the argument challenge? The argument challenges the explanation that ELCs are too big to grow faster than the overall market. And you really say, hey, does the first, which is a majority of them are run by their founders, does the first support this? You kind of ask yourself, is that true? And the answer to that is not, because of which I'm going to reject choice D over here. Folks who chose choice D, many of you chose choice D. Doubts about choice D? Any doubts about choice D before we go forward? Any doubts? This is 2. I'm doing all caps so that my handwriting is a bit more legible. I don't know if it's legible enough for you if you're watching this on a tiny screen, but hopefully for many of you it's legible enough. Can you reject B on the second part too? Second is a competing explanation that the argument favors. Yes, no, you can't reject it on the second part. The argument does favor that. It is a competing explanation. So yes, I mean, if you went to that part, you did that part correct over here. All right. I think we don't need to go through all the annotations, but let's kind of sit back over here. And you say, when you think about bold-faced questions, and remember we said we're going to focus in this session, what are some of the core skills that bold-faced questions test? The first core skill is the ability to classify a statement. Can you, after you read a statement, can you really classify into what we call as a fact or a claim bucket? And then within it, can you kind of further really say, is it a belief? If it's in the claim bucket, is it a conclusion? Is it a prediction? And so on and so forth. So there are a bunch of terms that go in that claim bucket over there. Versus if it's in the fact bucket, is it an observation? Is it some sort of a principle? In general, a lot of evidences are fact. All the evidence is one such word that can go in both claim and fact buckets. So can you really distinguish when you look at the statement and say which part of it is whether a statement is a fact or a claim? And you saw that in one of the answer choices. The second is relating that statement to the main point or the conclusion. The main conclusion over here, does it support or refute, or it's kind of ambivalent to it. Sometimes you've got to relate both the bolded statements as well. So relating both the bolded statement, whether they support or refute or there no relation. The other piece is answer choices in boldface questions. They're what I call as sometimes 2 or 3 dimensional answer choices, where the answer choice is structured such as X is a fact that supports a conclusion that is challenged by someone else in the argument. It's like a 3-dimensional statement over there itself. So the ability to visualize that 3-dimensional statement is also tested over here. If you're an EG Math student, this is where you'd really learn all of this. A lot of them happen in our boldface concept files, our boldface application files as well. With regards to argument structure, a lot of that happens in the premise and conclusion files, as well as in our strength and weaken file and assumption files as well over here. Okay. So how does, I'm going to look at the incorrect answer choices, starting with A, B, D, and E over here. And we're going to really say, okay, which part, the parts in red are the ones that are wrong, and you're going to really see which core skill do they attack. When you look at this as choice A, the first is a claim. This part is wrong, which means it attacks your ability to classify the statement. When you look at the accuracy, which is at issue in the argument, that's the logical ability to understand the logical structure of the argument. So when you make a mistake, you've got to really say which core skill failed you, because once you understand the core skill that failed you, if you improve upon it, and improving upon it is fairly simple, you can then see a tangible improvement towards your ability in boldface and get to that 90th percentile in verbal, or 95th or 99th percentile over there. The first is an objection. Again, you can see the ability to classify a statement. This part is wrong. This was choice B. That has been raised against what opposition defended in the argument. That's the logical structure of the argument, which is also wrong. So this is also wrong over here. Let's look at choice D. Choice D was, and then this tells you which part is correct, which part is not. An explanation that the argument challenges, it's purely based on the logical structure of the argument and the linkage between both boldface 1 and boldface 2. And choice E, we didn't discuss choice E, again, is the same thing, the logical structure and the linkages between both these statements. So the thing which is there is, when you think about answer choices, when you think about doing a strategic review, when you solve a question, you've got to do that strategic review and say if you solved it correctly, did you solve it correctly for the right reasons? If you made a mistake, which core skill did you falter on, so that you can get better on that core skill. All right, with that, let's go to question 2 over here. And again, let's look at the stats for this particular question. Over here in this, we had choices C and D that were very popular. Choice C was 12. Hold on. Choice C was 12 people chose choice C. Choice D was 10, I believe. And then you had, one person over here, one person over here, and 2 people over here. That's good in this case. Again, same process. So let's go into passage analysis over here. The first part is context over here. And you get 2 facts, and it says Newton developed some mathematical concepts that are fundamental to modern calculus. Leibniz, the German polymath, he actually developed similar concepts. Analogous concepts and techniques mean similar concepts. Then the author presents a traditional view which is where the traditional view has been that these discoveries have been independent. And then you see the contrast word, a keyword over here, however, which means that you're going to go against the traditional view. And with the fact that's used to support that is that, hey, the belief that's used to contrast that is that this recent discovery of certain notes these notes discuss one of Newton's books on mathematics. Okay. Then you look at this and says several scholars have argued that since the book includes a presentation of calculus, Newton's calculus, and since these notes were written before this thing, so there are two facts that are presented over here, and the second fact is bolded over here. So the two data points that are presented, it is virtually certain that the traditional view is false. So again, when you look at the context of this, you say, who is giving this conclusion? These are several scholars who have argued this traditional view. So this is not the author's conclusion. At least we don't know it as of yet over here. Okay, so that's an opinion. Then the author really says a bit more cautious conclusion than this is called for. However, so this is what where the author presents another opinion, and then from here, and there's the second bolded statement is Leibniz notes are limited to early sections of Newton's books, sections that precede the ones, blah, 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 blah. So then this is a statement which the author also presents a fact. Now, when we create the logical structure, and as we go to that logical structure, that's where we make or break this argument over here. You start with the main conclusion. The main conclusion is always by the author over here. So this is your main conclusion. This is a claim which is in the opposite direction. The author actually criticizes or goes against that main conclusion, or in many ways says that, hey, that main conclusion, that claim this is presented in statement 4 may not be true. Okay. Statement 1 is your context. Statement 2 is a traditional belief, which is which and then another fact that goes kind of against that traditional belief. And then there are two other facts over here. These two facts in statement 3, they support statement number 4 over here, and which means they're counter to the main conclusion. MC is your main conclusion. And statement 6 is written to make you believe in the main conclusion. Now, any questions on this logical structure? Any questions on this? This is when I talk about visualization, this is a map that you should have in your mind. Any questions about this? Yes, no? Let's get this. I think there's a certain amount of delay between when I speak versus when you guys hear this. Any questions about this logical structure? So if we have this, then let's kind of see what can we pre-think over here. Questions? I don't think I can see the chat in the tool that we have. Any questions, guys? And again, the two places where you see the bolded statements are over here in this case. Okay, both of these are facts. Okay, so let's focus on choice C over here. A lot of you chose choice C. So choice C says the first provides evidence. That seems okay. Evidence, a fact can be evidence in support of an intermediate conclusion. That's true as well. That evidence does support statement 3 does support statement 4 over here. The notes was written before Leibniz's own development of calculus. It is virtually certain that the traditional have argued, okay. Okay, let's kind of go through this and then I'm going to look at good boy's doubt over here. So the first provides evidence in support of what? An intermediate conclusion. What is that intermediate conclusion that it's supporting? The intermediate conclusion that it's supporting is that traditional view is false. That's the intermediate conclusion that is supporting. Now the question that you have to ask is that is drawn to provide support for the overall position that the argument defends. So that intermediate conclusion, first of all, does it provide support for an overall position that the argument that the historian defends? Does it provide support for the overall position? No, it doesn't provide support for the overall position that the historian is defending. In fact, the historian isn't defending any position. The historian is really saying, hey, the conclusion that these researchers are reaching on to, that the traditional view is false, it is virtually, is you need to really take it with a pinch of salt. Where he's saying a more cautious conclusion is called for. However, he's saying, take that claim of researchers with a pinch of salt. He's not saying the traditional view is true. He's saying take that claim with a pinch of salt overall. So this part is wrong, which is what makes choice C wrong. Okay. Let's look at choice D. Choice D is much more simple, much more correct. The first is evidence. That's true. That has been used to support a conclusion. Okay, a conclusion, not the conclusion. A conclusion means one of the conclusions. An intermediate conclusion is a conclusion over here. And that part's really important, that the historian criticizes, which is true. The historian does criticize this conclusion that it is virtually certain that the traditional view is false. We kind of went about this over here. The main conclusion is this claim is in the opposite direction of the main conclusion. The main conclusion criticizes this over here. Okay. So this is correct. This is correct. A conclusion that the historian criticizes. The second is evidence offered in support of the historian's own position. What is the historian's own position? A more cautious conclusion is called for, and the second does make that more believable. So choice D is the correct answer. Any doubts on choice D or choice C over here? So Good Boy says, does Liz support the traditional belief? You could really argue at a second level that it kind of lends some support to the traditional belief, but that's not the purpose why the author is put in over here. Remember this. You have to understand the purpose over here. The author is providing this piece, and then the question that I'm really saying, answering is Good Boy's question, where it says lib notes or Leibniz notes. We should call him Leibniz. This is a really good polymath. Are limited to the early section. So does that support the traditional view over there? I wouldn't go that far. I would read, because the purpose of it is not to make people believe in the traditional view. The purpose of this statement is to make the author's conclusion more believable. Remember this. Okay. In this, there are two views. One is the traditional view, which is really saying that these are independent. And there is the view of researchers. This is the view of researchers, which is really saying that the traditional view is you're virtually certain that the traditional view is false. And the author is not saying, hey, researchers, you are, traditional view is absolutely true, and researchers, you are absolutely wrong. What you're really saying is, hey, researchers, don't jump the gun that fast. Okay, it's like in the COVID world. When a vaccine is successful on a group of patients, and a company really says, hey, the vaccine is effective, we should just do mass vaccination, and if there are people who are really doubting that, they're not really saying you're wrong. What they're really saying is, hey, don't get ahead so far, let's kind of go step by step. Okay, Good Boy, does that help answer your question? Is the second part of that correct? The second provides evidence against that intermediate conclusion. Yes, that part is correct. That part is correct. Yes. Yashwant. Okay. So, key takeaways from this part before we go into RC. What have we learned from these two questions that is going to impact how we approach boldface questions. And by the way, for those of you who say we don't know claims versus fact, we don't know how to go through the boldface questions. If you go to the EGMAT account, um, we have a few boldface concept and application files, about 15 odd examples, and as a part of our free trial, it's about 20% of the boldface coverage that we have in 15% of the boldface coverage that we have in our course. You can log in and take a look at those over here. But what have we learned overall from this? What have we learned? The first thing is, always make sure that before you look at the answer choices, create the argument structure, identify the main conclusion, identify the statements as facts, claims that are there. The second thing is, build that logical structure. The third thing is, when you pre-think, you're able to cement that logical structure, and you have an answer in your mind that you can compare and contrast. Okay. And then the fourth piece over here, which is very important, is that when you make a mistake, then always make sure you map why you made a mistake to one of the core skills. In fact, even when you answer it correctly, make sure you answer it correctly for the right reasons. That way, that's when you go and improve. Okay. And this is how, you might think this process is very long. You might think, man, I'm going to take a lot longer to improve on CR over here. Here's evidence of people who've used this process. They haven't had to solve that many questions. And Jim, for example, started, or rather was prepared, scored a 700, was stuck at V34. And the reason why he was stuck at V34 was because his CR ability was just 39%. His SC and RC were almost there. And so once he's incorporated pre-thinking, he was able to improve his CR ability from 39% to 97% over here. You can click on the link that is shared, and you can really see his ESRs. You can see how both his ability as well as improved as time to answer questions went down. Jim, by the way, recently got accepted into both Columbia as well as GSB Chicago. And he'd be talking about how he approached his applications on our platform on 22nd of December, I believe. Okay. Another guy, Rohit Malan, who scored a 760. He basically, for him, he was at a V27. He went from a V27, which is the 50th percentile, to a 96th percentile. And for him, as he followed the approach of pre-thinking, he was able to improve on his timing, which means he's able to complete all 36 questions. He was much more calm. He didn't have to reread the passages overall. And in sentence correction, we haven't talked about the meaning-based approach, which we'll talk about on Sunday. He was able to really answer questions with a lot more confidence over here. So, by the way, if you need a study plan, we do have about, I think, 8 slots open where we give you that personalized study plan, where we help you identify your target quant and verbal scores. We give you an accurate estimate of how much time you need, not a generic study plan, but a study plan that's personalized to you, and then define what's the best sequence of execution depending on what core skills you may already have. So you can work with our GMAT strategy experts. I think we have about 8 slots open over here. We also have a number properties webinar that is on this Sunday that you can register for. In this, our goal is to help you go from someone who's at a 30th percentile in remainders to someone who can confidently solve 700 level data sufficiency questions in that one topic of remainders. In 2 hours, we take you from that 30th percentile to that 90th percentile in this particular webinar. Okay, with that, I want to talk about reading comprehension right now. And in reading comprehension, we're going to do this very differently. So normally we do RC and I give you an entire passage and give you 6 questions, and we solve those 6 questions. This is going to be a lot more of of a skill building exercise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a passage, and I'm going to give you small chunks of the passage, and we have specially formulated questions around those small chunks. Okay, this essentially is a part of one of the we have a paid session in paid batch in RC. This is about 50% of our reading strategy is one session that we do. So when we teach you RC, in addition to what we do in our online course, we have two sessions in which we just teach you how to read a passage properly. Then we have application session where we deal with sciences, social sciences, geographical sciences, economics and business passages, and then we have workshops which are built in over here. So this is a part of the first session. Okay, again, our goal really is to tell you what does it take to read the RC passage properly. And we're going to focus on these three things where we can help you use keywords to predict what's coming and comprehend whatever you're reading. And we're going to give you 2 lines, no more than that. I think the most we give you in a single go is 2 lines of new information. And those questions are built just on those 2 lines. The goal really is that that you understand the depth to which you need to read to be able to answer questions. Okay. Yeah. So I think with that, let's get started with this. Here is the first batch of questions. Just these 2 lines. Take about 40 seconds to read these 2 lines. And then Nava, if you can share the link to this particular poll question. Okay, here are the questions. So again, as you come here, you don't need to, you can go completely on the form. All the information is there on the form. So okay, guys, last 30 seconds. Again, just these 2 lines. And again, this is a non-traditional way of asking questions. Let's get to the responses here. Very, very simple questions. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. Look at this. So let's kind of go through these questions. So very simple passage. The first line starts is the question that the author says, is there a massive black hole at the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way? Basically. So when you look at this, you really say, hey, maybe the author wants to answer this question in the passage. Then the author says, the evidence is inconclusive. So then you really say, okay, maybe the author will tell you why it's inconclusive. Okay, and so but the point really is this is author's conclusion that the evidence that is there is inconclusive. Then the author has a keyword which says just as, is just as is a comparison keyword. One thing that you want to notice when it comes to GMAT RC is comparisons always lead to questions. So when you see comparisons, when you see a keyword which denotes comparisons, understand what that keyword means. In this case, just as means in a similar manner, or the other use of just as is at the same time. So the author says, just as the sun's mass can be determined given the knowledge of other variables, um, by the velocity at which planets orbit. So in this, when you look at this, you say, okay, what is the author doing? He's explaining the method which is used to determine the mass of the sun, or sun's mass. The same method can also be used to do something over here. So let's look at question one. 50% if you got this right. So when you're comparing, you always compare like terms. So what you really, if you're comparing the mass of the sun, just as sun's mass can be determined, you would, the comparison on the other hand, and should be the mass of something else, can also be determined over here. For those of you who chose the velocity of a particular object, that's an illogical comparison. Why? Because we are determining the mass using this method, and we are keeping the method the same. Okay, so the velocity would be illogical, and mass versus existence would also be illogical. Now, so you'd say, why is it that you have a question like this? Why? Because on the GMAT, you would never have a question like this. The reason is, when you're reading comparisons, you want to predict what's coming. It makes comprehension a lot easier over here, and you're going to really see actual questions are built on such comparisons over here. Okay. Now, just as is a keyword, it's really important to know. There are about 50 to 70 keywords that can help you predict what the author is going to write. It's used in form of comparison. So over here, for example, here's a sentence which says older children spread the coronavirus just as, and I have it in caps over here just to emphasize, just as much as adults. Another way to look at this is that it also talks about simultaneous action over here, where it says SoftBank Group unveiled the building that will house its new WeWork design headquarters, just as COVID-19 pandemic forces a shift away from offices. So just as over here means it happened at the same time. It's really important to know the various meanings that these keywords can convey, so that as you read, you comprehend what you're reading a lot better. All right, with that, okay. Question two, both of you got, all of you got it right over here. That, what can we say about the presence of existence of a massive black hole? The author says the evidence is inconclusive, which is what leads to we cannot be sure. So very, very simple stuff. Let's kind of move forward over here and read this piece and go through the next batch of questions. All right. Last 30 seconds, get both those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so again, we are continuing with the same passage over here. Um, and you can really see the full sentence. Just as the sun's mass can be determined given knowledge of other variables by the velocity at which its planets orbit, the mass at the center of Milky Way can be revealed by the velocities of stars and gas um, uh, orbiting the galactic center over here. So what the author does is he denotes a comparison. He says the same method can be used that is used to find the mass of sun, a mass of the sun. The same method can also be used to determine the mass of the object at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. Choice C is the correct answer in this case. What we are comparing over here is the method, not the mass. But 40% of you have chosen choice B over here. 60% of you have chosen choice C in this case, which is the correct answer. When you look at this, the comparison, we are really doing that comparison of the method, not the mass. We're not comparing sun's mass with the mass of the object, or we're not comparing the sun with the object at the center of Milky Way. Over here, this one, pretty much everyone got this right. What can we say about the velocities at which planets orbit around the sun versus the velocities at which stars and gas orbit around the galactic center? They're both used independently to calculate the mass of the object that they rotate around over here. Okay. With that, any doubts upon this before we go forward to question 5 and 6? Okay, here are questions 5 and 6. All right, another 30 seconds before we move forward. All right, get those answers in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, let's move forward over here and let's look at this. So we're going to start with the last line we over here, which is this dynamical evidence. When you think about this dynamical evidence, what are we talking about? We're talking about the mass that's estimated using the same method that we use to determine the mass of the sun. This calculated mass argues for, what does argues for mean? Argues for means it supports, okay, an extremely compact object with a mass 2 to 3 million times that heavier than a sun, or as heavy as the sun. Not heavier than, but it should be as heavy as our sun. So when you look at this, what does dynamical evidence refer to? Okay, what it refers to is choice B, which is the mass at the center, which is determined using the velocities of stars and gases orbiting around it. Okay, when you look at choice D, which is what a couple of you have chosen over here, that is based on dynamical evidence. But what dynamical evidence refers to is the computed mass, or the estimated mass based on the velocities of stars and gas over here. Okay. And that computed mass argues for, so this dynamical evidence argues for over here. But the dynamical evidence, what it is actually the mass that is computed over there. Okay, so for those of you who chose choice D, you kind of really chose the option which comes because of the dynamical evidence. Okay, and so it doesn't refer to the dynamical evidence over there. Let's look at choice A. Assumption about stars velocity is very few of you chose this. Choice B is the correct one, the mass, which is computed over here. And choice C, the fact that there exists an object, that has already been known. That's not disputed, or that's not arrived at because of this dynamical evidence over here. So argues for actually means support. You can really say Machiavelli is a good or bad guy. This biography argues for the former. The big stick argues for a robust military role abroad. Again, you can see some of those sentences over here. Let's look at question 6. What can you conclude from just the entire paragraph above? What you can conclude from is this, that, hey, even though the object is estimated to be millions of times heavier than the sun, because of this thing, the evidence is inconclusive. We can't be certain if it indeed is a black hole. That part is there. Let's look at all the other options. Choice A says, is even though the object is massive, it's not big enough, right? The author is not saying that it can be or it cannot be. Inconclusive means that you can go either way. So you can't be 100% certain that it is not big enough over here. Okay. Similarly, that comparison to a black hole can't be made conclusively over here. Why? Because the author himself is inconclusive. So you can't make a judgment either way. Similarly, you can't make a judgment about the density, and you can't really say it's probably not as big as the sun over here. Okay. With that, the last two questions for the day over here. Here is the paragraph again. You can really see we've just added one line over here. So just within a paragraph, you can put in these many questions. And Nava, if we can put in the poll questions for last two, if you can put the poll in over there. So I'm going to show the questions here. So you can see the dynamical evidence in this. Here is question number 8. You can see the underlined portion. And here is the last question. Okay, let's get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So good responses overall. So let's kind of look at this over here. We've just added one line uh, at the bottom, which is this line over here. So let's go forward. Although where you have a contrast over here. So according to the current theory, this makes the mass at the center of galaxy too dense to be anything but a black hole. What this is saying is the current theory says that this object can only be a black hole. When you say too dense to be anything but a black hole, remember this expression, we used it in the first question, too big to grow, too dense to be anything but a black hole. So you have too dense to be anything, but you also have a second contrast word, which means that this object can only be a black hole. So what there's a contrast at the beginning over here, which means that although according to the current theory, this makes the mass too dense to be anything but a black hole. So the current theory states that it can be too dense to be anything but a black hole, but then there's a word although, which means that the author is probably going to go against it over here. Although is to show a contrast or to show a downside or an upside. Those are the two uses that you have. Although also sometimes it's used to limit the set of possibilities. Although he's very intelligent, he could not ace the test. Although he's rich, he's not a good human being. Um, this is a sentence which is in an official sentence SC. It's an OG in the SC section. It says all those babies are already born with a sense of hearing. It is quite rudimentary, which means they can hear high pitched sounds better. So essentially, you can say it's a contrast, but it also limits the sense of limit the set of possibilities, which means they because it's a rudimentary, which means that they can hear, the possibility of hearing high pitch sounds. That's they hear them better rather than the lower pitch sounds over here. So question 7, I think 70% of you got this. It says, according to the passage, the dynamical evidence referred to in supports which of the following over here. Okay, so this dynamical evidence argues for an extremely compact object, which is basically what we pre-think over here, and with choice C is the correct one. I think about 70% if you got this correct. Let me just look at the poll over here. Yes, 75% of you got this correct over here. The existence of an extremely dense object at the center of Milky Way. Now, this question is an official passage. This question is the second question in that passage, and normal accuracy for this question is about 51%. So because you did all of this over here, that accuracy is gone up to 75% over here. The contention, there's too much energy, that part is not there. The students to be anything but a black hole. Again, this reverses this. This is the outcome of the fact that this is an extremely dense object. Okay, so this means that this doesn't support it. It's an outcome of the fact that it is an extremely dense object over here. Let's go to question 8. Question 8 says that according to the current theory, which of the following is true? What can be true? The current theory says that the mass at the center of the galaxy is too dense to be anything but a black hole, which means among the set of known objects, only a black hole can be just as massive and as dense. The mass at the center is too dense. So one is the mass, which is the computed mass, and the second is dense, which means nothing can be as massive or as dense but a black hole over here. So This one is if you were to look at it from the author's conclusion, but not as per from the point of view of the current theory. The key thing over here is this is what this is saying is according to the current theory. This is a direct inference of what's given over here. Among the known objects, only a black hole can be both, as heavy as well as dense over here. It's in line with what is stated over here in this line over here. Choice C, no other object in the galaxy that is not a black hole can be as heavy as 2 to 3 million times the mass. No, we are not talking about heavy. We're talking about both heavy and dense. Okay, you can have an object that's just as massive, just not both as massive and as dense over here. Again, this conclusion is not made over here. All right, this is where most of you faltered. The accuracy of this part, this question was 25% over here. The question says, which of the following statements would be the best candidate to logically follow post the comma? Okay, and post the comma is going to be because of although over here. Although the current theory says that it can only be a black hole, there's a reason to doubt that current theory. Remember, because the line starts with although, and that's the value of the keyword. So the portion of the after the comma should indicate why this object is not likely a black hole over here. And in this case, you look at a reason for this. So the absence of electromagnetic radiation indicate that such is not the case is something that's going to go along with that although over here. If you say only a black hole fits that calculation, of course, that would be wrong over here. Why? Because, then you're supporting the current theory. A supermassive white dwarf seems to be a better fit given the mass and density calculations. You'd be going against the current theory, which is a factual piece, because the current theory says the mass at the center is too dense to be anything but a black hole, which means just the inference that you'd have from this is that you can't have a supermassive white dwarf. Seems to that could be a better fit given the mass and density calculations. Why? Because the current theory says you can't have another object which fits that mass and density calculations. And most of you kind of gravitated towards this one over here. The other 25%, other 75% gravitated towards this, which means that you did not understand too dense to be anything but a black hole as per the current theory over here. So when you have an although, and you're given although x, y is not going to actually refute x. Okay, it'll give you another reason to go towards another direction despite x. It's more of a paradoxical thing, but not refuting x. All right, so with that, we've come to the end of the session. With regards to the key takeaways, I think the thing that you need to make sure is when it comes to GMAT RC, again, the way we did with CR, always read plus visualize. That's one piece. The second thing, which is really important over here, is use keywords to predict what is going to come. And the third thing that is there is whenever you see comparisons, be careful, slow down, because that's where questions would be formed. All right. With that, I just want to make sure that, acing GMAT RC, a lot of people think acing GMAT RC is very difficult. It's not. It can, once you follow these strategies, it can be fairly simple. Here's an example of a student who went from 710 to 750 because of this. And RCs can make or break your score. Why? Because they can be a time sucker overall. The way to do RCs quickly is to truly get interested, and which is where we expect you to get immersed in the passage. Don't think of them as an obstruction. Think of each RC to be, a piece of text that tells a very interesting story. If you do that, you're going to find tackling RC becomes a lot easier. And then, Do make notes if you're unable to comprehend. If you're able to comprehend, you may not need to. But if you're someone who's struggling with RC, start with making notes, and essentially, as you do that, you're going to first see that your accuracy goes up. But and initially, you might take longer to do this, but as you solve this again and again, as you do 10 to 12 passages with this, and you'd be spending about 40 minutes a passage, trust me, to review everything. You're going to internalize this, and you're going to get to that 8-minute mark on a per passage basis over here. Here's another guy who improved from V26 to V41, under 50th percentile to 94th percentile. He went to Oxford to do his MBA. He took 3 attempts, wasn't able to score cross V26. And again, RC was one area which sucked his time, which impacted his entire performance over here. For him, the key to excelling was to read slowly, but to make sure. This guy actually made this habit to say, I'm not going to go back to the passage no matter what, even though I have the option. I'm going to build a habit where I'm going to read it and make notes to such a degree that I won't need to go back. And because of this, he was able to go again to that 94th percentile over there. With that, we've come to the end of this webinar. If you want to help building that study plan, figuring out which are the areas where you need help, I don't know if you still have a slot available, but if we do, then you can go and book a slot over here. Also, we have the SC webinar on Saturday. You can register for it if you haven't registered for the same. And if you want to see incredible success stories, our YouTube channel has the largest collection of GMAT success stories. I think right now we're at about 125 over here, so not 100. So you can register for that. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We post about 3 detailed video debriefs every week or so. And then at this time, you can ask me anything. If you have any question, I'd be happy to address any questions, any question that you have. If there's no question, then I want to thank you guys for joining me today. I want to thank GMAT Club for allowing us to host this webinar. And if you guys have a question, if you guys like this webinar, then do click on the like icon over here, and you can download the PDF from the link as well. And I usually thank you for the praise. Okay, if there's no other question, then I want to thank you guys for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you on egmat.com. Again, remember, we have the SC webinar this Saturday and number properties webinar this Sunday.